London, April 1816. The conservatory of Somerset House glowed with moonlight, filtering through glass panes, casting silvered shadows across the exotic blooms that Lady Penelope Seymour sketched with careful precision. 26 years of age and 7 seasons of social invisibility had taught her this truth. Botanical specimens were far more interesting than the gentleman who never asked her to dance. Her charcoal moved across parchment with practiced strokes, capturing the delicate architecture of an Indian orchid. Inside the ballroom, the strains of a country dance drifted through closed doors, accompanied by the familiar sound of her mother's voice, directing yet another eligible bachelor toward her beautiful twin sisters. Penelope had ceased counting how many times a gentleman approached their family group, only to ask, "And where might I find the lovely Miss Ophelia this evening?" She pressed harder with her charcoal, the orchid's petals taking shape beneath her fingers. Years of invisibility. Years of being the forgotten daughter, the plain sister, the useful chaperone. Tonight, she had simply stopped pretending it mattered. If stories of overlooked brilliance and unexpected recognition touch your heart, subscribe now. You won't want to miss how one conversation changed everything. The conservatory door opened with a soft creak. Penelope froze, her hand suspended above the drawing. She had chosen this refuge specifically because no one ventured here during balls. The exotic plants held no appeal for guests seeking gossip and matrimonial prospects. Finally, a deep male voice muttered with palpable relief. A room without simpering debutantes discussing the cut of someone's Spencer. Penelope remained perfectly still in her shadowed corner, hoping the intruder would leave. Through the gap between 2 potted palms, she glimpsed a tall figure in impeccable evening dress, dark hair slightly disheveled as though he had been running his hands through it in frustration. Lord Felix Ashford, Marquess of Thornbridge. Even Penelope, who avoided society gossip as one might avoid the plague, knew of him. Returned from India after 10 years abroad, possessed of an immense fortune and an even more immense reputation for insulting every eligible young lady in London. Just last week at Almack's, he had reportedly told Lady Diana Fitzgerald that her conversation held all the intellectual depth of a puddle. The patronesses had nearly banned him on the spot. The Marquis moved deeper into the conservatory, examining the plants with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than the affected appreciation most gentlemen displayed. He paused before a flowering specimen near Penelope's hiding spot, leaning close to study its unusual blooms. "Magnificent," he murmured. "Dendrobium nobile, unless I am much mistaken. I have not seen one so healthy outside of Bengal." Despite herself, Penelope spoke. "You are mistaken, my lord. That is Dendrobium aggregatum, distinguished by the clustering pattern of its pseudobulbs and the deeper yellow pigmentation." The Marquis spun toward her voice, eyes narrowing as he attempted to locate her in the shadows. "I stand corrected. You have knowledge of orchid taxonomy?" "I have made a study of it." "In England? How remarkably unusual." He moved closer, though the darkness still concealed her features. "Most young ladies of my acquaintance can scarcely distinguish a rose from a tulip, yet claim expertise in all things botanical because they once pressed flowers in a book." "Perhaps you have been speaking with the wrong young ladies." A sound emerged from the Marquis that might have been a laugh, though it carried more surprise than humor. "Indeed, it would seem I have been." He gestured toward the orchids. "You must forgive my presumption. I fled the ballroom seeking respite from conversations about ribbons and weather. I did not expect to find someone who could actually identify Dendrobium aggregatum in the dark. The pseudobulbs are quite distinctive if one knows what to look for. As is your knowledge, apparently." The Marquis settled onto a bench near her position, maintaining a respectful distance. "Tell me, what brings a lady of botanical learning to hide in a conservatory during what I am reliably informed is meant to be the social event of the season?" Penelope hesitated. Something in his tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than the polite condescension she had endured from countless others. Perhaps I, too, find conversations about ribbons rather tedious. A kindred spirit. The satisfaction in his voice was unmistakable. How refreshing. I had begun to believe London society consisted entirely of vapid ornaments seeking advantageous marriages through strategic deployment of fan-fluttering. Your views on English ladies are well documented, my lord. Ah, so you know who I am. He did not sound particularly concerned by this revelation. And yet you continue to converse with me despite my apparently scandalous reputation. Either you are remarkably tolerant of social pariahs, or you share my poor opinion of society's judgment. Perhaps both. Penelope found herself relaxing despite the peculiarity of the situation. Though I confess, your comments at Almack's were rather cutting. Lady Diana asked me what I thought of her new gown. I answered honestly that I thought very little of it, as I generally think very little of fabric until it requires replacement. She interpreted this as an insult to her person, which was not my intent, though I admit it may have been my failure in communication. He paused. You disagree with my assessment? I disagree with your method. Honesty need not be weaponized. Interesting. The word carried genuine consideration. You believe I am weaponizing honesty rather than simply providing it? I believe you have spent 10 years in a place where directness was valued, and you have returned to a society that prizes subtle artifice. The collision between these two approaches is unfortunate. Silence fell between them, broken only by the distant music from the ballroom. When the Marquis spoke again, his voice held a quality Penelope had not yet heard: uncertainty. That is the most insightful observation anyone has offered me since my return, including my own family, who seem to believe I have become deliberately contrary out of spite rather than... He trailed off. Rather than simply forgetting how to navigate a world of unspoken rules. Precisely. The relief in his response was palpable. You understand. For the next 2 hours, they talked about India, about botany, about the ridiculous restrictions placed upon scientific inquiry by social convention. The Marquis described orchids growing wild in mountain forests, their roots clinging to trees in ways that defied English gardening logic. Penelope shared her observations on hybridization patterns, drawing on knowledge gleaned from years of solitary study. When she mentioned attempting to cultivate Phalaenopsis in her father's greenhouse, the Marquis immediately challenged her approach. You cannot treat tropical orchids like English garden flowers. The humidity requirements alone are being met through a system of water trays and enclosed glass housing, Penelope interrupted. I am not an amateur, my lord. Evidently not. His approval was unmistakable. What results have you achieved? They debated cultivation techniques, argued about the merits of various growing media, and discovered a shared fascination with the relationship between orchids and the insects that pollinated them. Penelope forgot to feel self-conscious, forgot that she was the plain daughter, the perpetual wallflower, the woman 7 seasons had failed to marry. For 2 hours, she was simply herself. It was only when moonlight shifted through the glass ceiling, illuminating her corner more fully, that the Marquis finally saw her clearly. She watched his gaze travel over her unremarkable brown hair, her unfashionably sturdy figure, her face that had launched not a single courtship in 7 years. Something in his expression shifted, though Penelope could not quite identify what. Forgive me, he said slowly. I have been appallingly rude. I have not even requested an introduction, and yet we have conversed for... He consulted his pocket watch. Good God, nearly 3 hours. I am Felix Ashford, Marquis of Thornbridge, though you apparently already knew that. Miss P? Penelope said quickly, panic rising in her chest. If he learned her identity, this magical evening would transform into something else entirely. Pity, perhaps, or worse, the polite dismissal she saw in every gentleman's eyes when they looked past her toward her beautiful sisters. "Miss P?" His brows drew together. "Surely you have a surname." "I do. But I think perhaps this conversation should remain as it is. Two people discussing orchids without the weight of proper introductions and social obligation." She gathered her sketches hastily. "Thank you for a most enlightening evening, Lord Thornbridge." "Wait!" But Penelope had already slipped through the conservatory door and into the crowd beyond, her heart pounding with a mixture of exhilaration and dread. For a few hours, she had been interesting, intelligent, valued for her mind rather than dismissed for her appearance. She would not allow reality to destroy that fragile gift. The following morning found Lord Felix Ashford in the library of his London townhouse, frustrated beyond measure. His secretary, Mr. Henshaw, stood before the desk with increasingly bewildered expression as his employer issued a series of unusual commands. "Find her," Felix repeated. "A Miss P who possesses extensive knowledge of orchid taxonomy, attends Somerset House balls, and has access to a greenhouse where she is currently attempting to cultivate Phalaenopsis." "My lord, with respect, that is hardly sufficient information. London society includes hundreds of young ladies who can identify Dendrobium aggregatum in the dark, who understand orchid root structure and hybridization patterns, who read scientific journals rather than La Belle Assemblée." Felix stood abruptly, pacing before the windows. "She is not like other young ladies, Henshaw. She is remarkable." Mr. Henshaw cleared his throat delicately. "Perhaps if you were to describe her appearance, I hardly noticed." This was not entirely true. Felix had noticed her plain features, her unfashionable figure. But he had also noticed the passion in her voice when she spoke of botany, the quick intelligence in her rebuttals, the complete absence of simpering artifice that plagued every other woman he had encountered since returning to England. He had noticed that for 3 hours he had not been bored. In India, Felix had grown accustomed to straightforward communication, to valuing competence over breeding, to judging people by their minds rather than their pedigree. Returning to London had been a crushing disappointment until last night. Until Miss P. "Make inquiries," Felix instructed. "Discreetly. I need to know her identity." "Of course, my lord." Mr. Henshaw hesitated at the door. "Though I feel obligated to mention that your aunt, Lady Thornbridge, has requested your presence this afternoon. She wishes to introduce you to the Mrs. Seymour. Twin sisters, apparently, considered the beauties of the season." Felix waved a dismissive hand. "Send my regrets. I have no interest in meeting more decorative debutantes." "My lord, your aunt is quite insistent. She believes you must marry soon, and the Earl of Grantwell's daughters are—" "I said no, Henshaw." The secretary departed, leaving Felix alone with his frustration. Somewhere in London lived a woman who could discuss orchid taxonomy with genuine knowledge, who challenged his assumptions, who made him forget how much he despised society gatherings. A woman who signed herself simply Miss P and then vanished like morning mist. He would find her. He had not felt this intrigued by anyone in a decade. Penelope's morning began with her mother's disappointed sigh, a sound she had perfected over 26 years of having an unmarriageable eldest daughter. "7 seasons," Lady Grantwell murmured, examining Penelope over her morning chocolate, "and not a single proposal. Your sisters have had 3 each already, and they have only just completed their first season." "How fortunate for them," Penelope replied evenly, buttering her toast with careful precision. "It is your attitude, Penelope. That is the problem." Her mother set down her cup with emphasis. "You make no effort. You hide in corners reading botanical texts when you should be engaging gentlemen in pleasant conversation." "I engage them quite readily when they bother to speak with me, Mama. They do not speak with you because you make no effort to attract their notice." Lady Grantwell's voice rose slightly. "Look at your sisters. Ophelia and Cordelia understand the importance of being agreeable, of smiling, of discussing topics that interest gentlemen rather than boring them with, with plant nonsense. Penelope took a careful sip of tea, willing herself to maintain composure. 7 seasons of this same conversation had worn her patience thin, but experience had taught her that arguing only made matters worse. "Your father and I have decided," Lady Grantwell continued, "that it would be best if you accept your position. Not every woman is meant for marriage, Penelope. You are useful as you are, helping to chaperone your sisters, managing the household accounts. There is dignity in spinsterhood if one accepts it gracefully." The words struck like physical blows, though Penelope showed no outward reaction. She had known this moment would arrive eventually. 7 seasons was extraordinary, even by the standards of the most desperate matchmaking mamas. At some point, even the most optimistic family had to acknowledge defeat. "Of course, Mama," she said quietly. "Whatever you think best." Lady Grantwell looked relieved. "I am glad you are being sensible about this. Now, we must discuss this afternoon. Lady Thornbridge has requested an introduction to the girls. Apparently her nephew has just returned from India with an enormous fortune. The Marquis of Thornbridge, though I have heard rather alarming things about his manners." Penelope's teacup clattered against its saucer. "Lady Thornbridge? Yes. Why do you look so pale? You are not acquainted with the family, surely?" "No, Mama. Of course not." But her heart hammered in her chest. The Marquis of Thornbridge. Felix Ashford. The man from the conservatory who had spent 3 hours discussing orchids with her. Who had looked at her intelligence with appreciation rather than dismissal. The man who had no idea he had been conversing with the unmarriageable Miss Penelope Seymour, eldest and plainest daughter of the Earl of Grantwell. "Good. Then you will accompany your sisters as their chaperone. I expect you to remain in the background and allow Ophelia and Cordelia to make proper impressions." Lady Grantwell stood, already dismissing Penelope from her thoughts. "Wear your gray dress. It is appropriately modest." After her mother departed, Penelope sat frozen at the breakfast table. She should be pleased. The Marquis would meet her beautiful sisters, would doubtless be charmed by one or both of them, would forget entirely about the awkward woman he had encountered in a darkened conservatory. This was how the world worked. Beautiful women secured advantageous marriages. Plain women accepted spinsterhood with grace. So why did her chest ache as though something vital was being torn away? Lady Thornbridge's drawing room shimmered with afternoon sunlight, the perfect setting for displaying the Earl of Grantwell's famous twin daughters. Ophelia and Cordelia Seymour arranged themselves like matched porcelain figurines on the settee, golden curls perfectly coiffed, morning dresses in complementary shades of rose and cream. Penelope settled into a chair near the window, gray dress rendering her nearly invisible against the upholstery. This was familiar territory. She had perfected the art of vanishing in plain sight. "My nephew will join us shortly," Lady Thornbridge announced, pouring tea with elaborate ceremony. "Lord Thornbridge has been abroad for many years. I hope you will find him agreeable." The hesitation in her voice suggested she herself found the Marquis something other than agreeable. Ophelia leaned toward Cordelia, whispering behind her fan. "I heard he called Lady Diana's conversation vapid to her face." "Scandalous," Cordelia whispered back, her eyes bright with interest. "Though Lady Diana is rather tedious, perhaps he is simply honest." "Honestly rude," Ophelia corrected, though she too looked intrigued. Rude gentlemen with enormous fortunes were apparently more interesting than polite ones without. The drawing room door opened. Felix Ashford entered, his expression suggesting he would rather be anywhere else. His dark hair was slightly too long, his cravat tied with precision but without fashionable flair. His gray eyes swept the room with barely concealed boredom until they found Penelope. Recognition flared in his gaze. She saw the moment he connected the woman in the conservatory with the plain figure in the gray dress. Saw something else too, surprise perhaps, or vindication. He crossed directly to her chair, ignoring the beauties on the settee, ignoring his aunt's startled gasp. "Miss P," he said, his voice carrying satisfaction and accusation in equal measure. How delightful to see you again. Or should I say, Miss Penelope Seymour? The room fell silent. Lady Thornbridge recovered first. Felix, you are meant to be introduced to the Mrs. Seymour. She gestured toward the twins. Miss Ophelia and Miss Cordelia. I'm already acquainted with Miss Penelope Seymour, Felix replied without looking away from Penelope's face. We spent a most enlightening evening discussing orchid taxonomy. I have been searching for her all morning. Ophelia's fan stopped mid-flutter. Cordelia's eyes widened. Lady Thornbridge looked as though she might faint. Lady Grantwell, arriving behind her daughters, recovered her composure with remarkable speed. There must be some misunderstanding, Lord Thornbridge. Penelope does not attend social events. She serves as chaperone for her younger sisters. I attended the Somerset House ball last evening, Mamma, Penelope said quietly, finding her voice at last. In the conservatory. The conservatory? Lady Grantwell's tone suggested Penelope had confessed to something scandalous. Why on earth would you go to the conservatory? To sketch the orchids. Penelope met Felix's gaze directly. I did not expect to encounter anyone else there. I certainly did not intend to deceive Lord Thornbridge as to my identity. Yet you signed yourself Miss P. and fled before I could learn your surname, Felix said. His tone was not accusatory, merely stating facts. Why? Because years of social disappointment had taught her that men did not want intelligent conversation from plain women. Because she had not wanted pity to replace the respect she saw in his eyes. Because for 3 hours she had been valued for her mind rather than dismissed for her appearance. She could not say any of this in a drawing room full of witnesses. I thought it better to preserve the evening as it was, she said instead, without the complications of proper introductions. Understanding flickered across Felix's face. Complications, he repeated slowly. You mean the complications of me discovering you were the Earl of Grantwell's eldest daughter, rather than one of these... He gestured vaguely toward the twins. Ornamental debutantes I was presumably meant to court? Lady Thornbridge made a strangled sound. Lady Grantwell looked apoplectic. Ophelia and Cordelia exchanged glances that suggested they were not entirely offended by being called ornamental. Felix turned to his aunt with deliberate formality. I apologize for my rudeness, Aunt. However, I must be clear. He looked back at Penelope, his gray eyes steady and certain. I did not come here for them. I came for Miss Penelope Seymour. With your permission, of course, I wish to court her. The silence that followed was profound. Lady Grantwell found her voice first. Court Penelope? But she is, that is... She floundered, unable to complete the sentence without explicitly stating that her eldest daughter was plain, unmarriageable, and long past any reasonable expectation of attracting a marquis. She is remarkably intelligent, Felix finished calmly. She possesses extensive knowledge of botany, can identify orchid species in low light, and engages in genuine intellectual discourse rather than meaningless social pleasantries. These are qualities I value highly. But her appearance, Lady Grantwell began, then stopped, realizing she was insulting her own daughter. Is perfectly adequate, Felix said, his tone cooling noticeably. Though I confess I hardly noticed her appearance during our conversation, I was too engaged with her mind. Penelope felt heat rising in her cheeks. Was this truly happening? Was the Marquis of Thornbridge, wealthy, titled, and notoriously difficult to please, genuinely expressing interest in courting her? I am not certain this is appropriate, Lady Grantwell said weakly. Penelope is not, she has not been. I am 26, Mamma, Penelope interrupted, surprising herself. Well past the age of requiring your permission for courtship, and I find I am quite interested in Lord Thornbridge's proposal. Years of being invisible had taught her patience, but they had also taught her this. Opportunities like this did not come twice. Felix's expression transformed into something that might have been a smile. Excellent. Then I propose we continue our discussion of Phalaenopsis cultivation. You mentioned attempting a greenhouse system. I should very much like to see your results. Now? Lady Thornbridge sounded faint. Why not? Felix extended his hand toward Penelope. Unless you have other pressing engagements? Penelope looked at his outstretched hand, then at her mother's shocked face, then at her sister's matching expressions of bewildered fascination. 7 years of being told she was too plain, too clever, too interested in the wrong things. She placed her hand in his. I have no other engagements, Lord Thornbridge. The greenhouse would be delightful. As they left the drawing room together, she heard Lady Thornbridge say weakly, Well, that was unexpected. Unexpected indeed. The Earl of Grantwell's greenhouse occupied the rear garden of the family's townhouse, a glass structure Penelope had claimed as her sanctuary years earlier. She led Felix along the gravel paths, acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the impropriety of being alone with him even in such a setting. But propriety had never gained her anything. Years of perfect behavior had earned her precisely nothing except relegation to permanent spinsterhood. Here, she said, stopping before her experimental orchid section. Carefully labeled specimens lined the benches, each with detailed notes on cultivation conditions and growth patterns. I have been attempting to recreate tropical humidity using enclosed glass boxes and water evaporation. Felix bent to examine the setup, his expression transforming into genuine admiration. This is remarkable work. You have created microclimates within the greenhouse itself? The larger structure provides baseline warmth, but individual species require different conditions. The Phalaenopsis particularly need consistent moisture without waterlogging the roots, Felix finished, his eyes alight with understanding. Yes, exactly. I witnessed similar techniques in India, though on a much larger scale. He straightened, looking at her with something beyond mere attraction. You have taught yourself all of this? I have had considerable time to pursue my interests, Penelope said dryly. The benefits of being unmarriageable. You are not unmarriageable. Felix's voice carried an edge. You have been overlooked by fools too blind to see past conventional beauty. A kind assessment, my lord, but... Felix, please. After spending hours discussing orchid root structures, I believe we are beyond formality. Felix? Penelope corrected, feeling strange using his given name. You must understand what you are proposing. I am not what gentlemen seek in a wife. What gentlemen seek is generally insipid and boring. He moved closer, though maintaining proper distance. I spent 10 years in India, Miss Penelope. May I call you Penelope? She nodded, not trusting her voice. I spent 10 years working with people valued for their competence and intelligence rather than their bloodlines or appearances. I returned to England expecting to find similar values, only to discover that London society cares more about the cut of a man's coat than the content of his character. I have been spectacularly unsuccessful at hiding my contempt for this system. Hence your reputation for insulting debutantes. Hence my reputation, he agreed ruefully. I do not mean to insult them. I simply cannot manufacture interest in conversations about ribbons when there are orchids to discuss, books to read, ideas to explore. He paused, his gray eyes serious. Then I met you, a woman who not only shares my interests, but challenges my assumptions, who corrects my botanical identifications. Who has built this? He gestured at the greenhouse. Do you truly believe I would prefer a beautiful simpleton over an intelligent woman simply because society dictates I should? Penelope's throat tightened. Society dictates a great many things, my lord. Felix, including that marquesses do not marry plain spinsters. Then I shall have the pleasure of defying society. Again. He smiled slightly. I have been doing so with great enthusiasm since my return. Your family will object. Your brother. My brother believes I should marry Lady Diana Fitzgerald for her father's political connections. He was quite put out when I told him I would rather discuss botany with an intelligent woman than politics with a beautiful fool. Felix's expression turned serious. I am not asking you to marry me today, Penelope. I am asking permission to court you, to continue our conversations, to see if what we discovered in that conservatory can become something more. Are what they had discovered in the conservatory. 3 hours where she had felt seen, valued, interesting. 3 hours where her mind had mattered more than her face. Could it become something more? I would like that, Penelope said softly. Though I warn you, my mother will attempt to redirect your attention toward my sisters at every opportunity. Your sisters are lovely ornaments, Felix said dismissively. I prefer living, growing things, like these orchids. He touched one of the phalaenopsis blooms gently. Beautiful not because of conventional standards, but because they thrive against all odds, adapting to conditions that would kill lesser species. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. When had anyone compared her to something beautiful? When had anyone suggested she thrived rather than merely survived? I must warn you as well, Felix continued. I am not a romantic man. I do not write poetry or deliver flowery speeches. I am direct to the point of rudeness, skeptical of social convention, and generally considered difficult company by anyone with conventional tastes. You sound perfectly dreadful, Penelope said, feeling a smile tug at her lips. I cannot imagine why anyone would want to spend time with you. Neither can I, honestly. Yet here you are. His answering smile transformed his severe features. Shall we spend the afternoon examining your cultivation notes? I have suggestions for improving humidity retention. Of course you do. I have 10 years of experience growing orchids in their native environment. My suggestions are excellent. Your arrogance is showing, my lord. Felix, and it is not arrogance if I am correct. Penelope laughed, a genuine sound of delight she had not produced in years. Then by all means, share your excellent suggestions. I am prepared to argue every single one. Magnificent, Felix said with satisfaction. I was hoping you would. They spent the next 4 hours among the orchids, debating, discussing, occasionally arguing with the passion of two people who had finally found someone who cared about the same peculiar things. When Lady Grantwell sent a maid to summon them for tea, Penelope felt the same reluctance she had experienced in the conservatory, the desire to preserve this moment, this connection, from the intrusion of the outside world. But Felix simply extended his arm. Shall we face society's judgment together? Penelope placed her hand on his arm. Together, she agreed. It felt like a promise. The subsequent 6 weeks were unlike anything Penelope had experienced in 7 seasons of social disappointment. Felix courted her with single-minded determination, appearing at every event she attended, not to dance with her beautiful sisters, but to stand beside her at the edge of the ballroom discussing botanical journals. Society reacted with predictable scandal. The misanthrope Marquis and the spinster. One particularly cruel wit dubbed them. Felix, when informed of this nickname, merely shrugged. At least they are consistent in their lack of imagination. Lady Grantwell vacillated between pride at having caught a Marquis's attention and horror that he insisted on courting the wrong daughter. She made increasingly desperate attempts to redirect Felix toward Ophelia or Cordelia, praising their accomplishments in music, their grace in dancing, their fashionable beauty. Felix endured these attempts with visible impatience. Finally, during one particularly determined speech about Ophelia's skill at the pianoforte, he interrupted. Lady Grantwell, with respect, I have no interest in musical accomplishments. I cannot carry a tune. I find extended musical performances tedious, and I would rather discuss scientific advances than listen to another young lady murder a Mozart sonata. Your eldest daughter shares my intellectual interests. That is infinitely more valuable to me than the ability to play instruments. Lady Grantwell looked as though she had been struck. Ophelia, overhearing from across the drawing room, whispered to Cordelia, "Is it terrible that I find him rather refreshing?" Horribly rude, Cordelia agreed, but at least he is honest about what he wants. The twins, to Penelope's surprise, became her unexpected allies. They deflected their mother's attempts to place them in Felix's path, claiming they found the Marquis too serious and rather frightening. In private, Ophelia confessed to Penelope that they actually found him fascinating. "He looks at you as though you are the most interesting person in the room," Ophelia said wistfully. "Even at balls where everyone is competing for attention, he simply stands beside you and ignores everyone else." "It must be lovely," Cordelia added, "to be valued for who you actually are rather than how you look." Penelope, who had spent years resenting her sister's easy beauty, felt something shift in her understanding of them. They too were trapped by society's expectations, required to be ornamental, discouraged from substance, valued only for appearance and accomplishments designed to attract husbands. "You should both marry men who value your minds," Penelope said firmly. "Beauty fades, intelligence endures." "Easy to say when you have both," Ophelia replied. "Felix sees your intelligence. We are never given the opportunity to display ours." It was a sobering thought. Felix's family proved more problematic than society gossip. His brother, Viscount Hartwell, arrived in London with the explicit purpose of preventing what he termed a disastrous mésalliance. The confrontation occurred in White's 3 weeks into the courtship. Hartwell cornered Felix in the reading room, his disapproval evident in every rigid line of his posture. "You cannot marry the Seymour spinster," Hartwell declared without preamble. "She is plain, she is old, and she brings nothing of value to the alliance." "She brings intelligence, genuine interest in subjects that matter to me, and honesty," Felix replied coldly. "More value than any decorative debutante could offer. The family expects you to marry advantageously. Lady Diana Fitzgerald is a beautiful fool who asked me if India was near France. I would rather remain unmarried than spend my life with someone whose conversation bores me to tears." "You are being deliberately contrary. Father would never have—" "Father died 10 years ago." Felix's voice turned glacial. "I have built a fortune independent of the family estates through actual work rather than inheritance. I will marry whom I choose when I choose, and if you attempt to interfere, I will ensure you regret it." The argument ended with Hartwell departing in high dudgeon, muttering about ungrateful younger brothers and family disgrace. The following afternoon, during their daily walk in Hyde Park, Felix recounted the confrontation to Penelope with barely suppressed fury. She felt both pride and concern as he described his brother's objections. "You should not estrange yourself from your family for my sake," she said quietly. "I am not estranging myself for your sake," Felix corrected. "I am establishing boundaries because my brother is an officious prig who believes he can dictate my life simply because he inherited a title. You are merely the fortunate beneficiary of my rebellion." "How romantic," Penelope said dryly. "I warned you I was not romantic." But his hand tightened on hers where it rested on his arm. "However, I am sincere. My family's approval is not required for me to know my own mind. I have spent 10 years making independent decisions in challenging circumstances. I am hardly going to be swayed by my brother's opinion now." Despite his confidence, Penelope worried. Society's disapproval she could endure. She had weathered it for years. But alienating Felix from his family seemed too high a price. Lady Thornbridge, surprisingly, proved to be an unexpected ally. Felix's aunt appeared at the Grantwell townhouse one afternoon, requesting a private interview with Penelope. "My nephew is stubborn," Lady Thornbridge announced without preamble. "Always has been. Once he decides something, heaven itself could not move him." "I am aware, my lady." "He has decided on you." Lady Thornbridge studied Penelope with sharp eyes. "I will not pretend to understand it entirely. You are not what society expects for a marquis. But Felix has never cared about society's expectations." "You believe I am unsuitable," Penelope said quietly. "I believe you are unexpected." Lady Thornbridge's expression softened slightly. "I have watched my nephew since his return from India. He is brilliant, accomplished, wealthy, and utterly miserable in London society. He finds no joy in the very activities meant to bring happiness. Until you." Penelope felt her breath catch. "He speaks of you constantly," Lady Thornbridge continued. "Your intelligence, your botanical knowledge, your ability to challenge his assumptions. For the first time since his return, he seems content. That is worth far more than conventional beauty or fashionable accomplishments." His brother disagrees. "Hartwell is an idiot who inherited a title and believes it makes him wise. Ignore him." Lady Thornbridge stood, preparing to depart. "Felix will propose soon. When he does, I hope you will accept. Not because he is a marquis, not because he is wealthy, but because I believe you make each other genuinely happy. That is rarer than you might imagine." After she left, Penelope sat in stunned silence. Make each other happy. Was that what they did? She examined her feelings carefully, the way she might examine a specimen under magnification. Yes, Felix made her happy. His conversation challenged her mind. His indifference to social convention freed her from the constant weight of feeling inadequate. His genuine admiration for her intelligence made her feel valued in ways she never had before. And she seemed to make him happy too, seemed to provide the intellectual companionship he had been seeking since his return to England, seemed to offer acceptance of his direct manner and unconventional views. Perhaps Lady Thornbridge was right. Perhaps that was enough. The proposal came not during a romantic moment, but during a spirited argument about orchid parasites in the Grantwell greenhouse. Penelope had just insisted that a particular specimen showed signs of scale insects when Felix stopped examining the plant entirely. Instead, he turned to look at her, his gray eyes intense and focused in a way that made her breath catch. His hand covered hers on the workbench, warm and certain. "Marry me," he said abruptly. Penelope stared at him. "I beg your pardon?" "Marry me," Felix repeated, sounding impatient. "We have been courting for 6 weeks. I find you intelligent, interesting, and occasionally infuriating in ways I quite enjoy. You are the only person in London whose company I can tolerate for extended periods. It seems logical that we should marry." That is possibly the least romantic proposal in the history of courtship. "I told you I was not romantic." But Felix looked uncertain now, his confidence wavering. "You do realize I am asking you to marry me? To be my wife, my marchioness, my partner in building the most remarkable orchid collection in England?" "The orchid collection is what convinced me," Penelope said, feeling a smile break across her face. "Not the title or the wealth, but the promise of orchids." Relief flooded Felix's expression. "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes." He kissed her then, a brief press of lips that conveyed more awkwardness than passion. When they broke apart, both looked faintly embarrassed. "We shall improve with practice," Felix said firmly. "I am certain of it," Penelope replied, a genuine smile touching her lips despite the warmth in her cheeks. "For we were rather more scientific than poetic, I think. Honest as always. This is why I love you." The words stopped them both. Felix looked startled, as though he had not meant to say them. Penelope felt her heart stutter in her chest. "You love me?" she asked quietly. "Apparently so." Felix took her hand, holding it carefully as though it might break. "I did not intend to. I returned to England determined to remain unmarried, convinced that English women were universally insipid. Then I met you, and you corrected my botanical identification. And I found myself searching all of London for a woman who signed herself Miss P. I believe that qualifies as love, though I confess I have limited experience with the emotion." Penelope felt tears gathering. Years of being told she was unmarriageable. Years of being invisible beside her beautiful sisters. years believing that intelligence was a liability rather than an asset. And here stood a man who loved her for the very things society had taught her to hide. "I love you too," she whispered, "even though you are arrogant and contrary and say dreadful things about people's intelligence." "I only say dreadful things about people who demonstrate dreadful intelligence. You, however, are magnificent." Felix pulled her closer, his embrace warm and solid. "We shall be spectacularly happy together, I think. We can argue about orchids for the next 50 years. Only 50? I am being conservative in my estimates." Penelope laughed against his chest, feeling joy bubble up from some deep place she had thought permanently scarred by rejection. This was happiness, this strange, intellectual, completely unromantic love that valued her mind and spirit more than her appearance. This was what she had waited 7 seasons to find. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the chapel at Thornbridge Estate, a small affair that scandalized society by its very modesty. Lady Grantwell had pushed for a grand London wedding, but Felix refused. "I will not turn our marriage into a spectacle for people who called us misanthrope and spinster," he declared. "Small ceremony, family and close friends only, then we leave for the countryside." Penelope agreed wholeheartedly. On her wedding morning, her sisters helped her dress in ivory silk, not the elaborate confection Lady Grantwell had ordered, but a simpler gown that suited Penelope's preferences. Ophelia arranged her hair while Cordelia fastened pearls around her neck. "You look beautiful," Ophelia said softly. "Not because of the dress or the jewelry, but because you look happy." "I am happy," Penelope admitted. "Terrified, but happy." "Good." Cordelia squeezed her hand. "Felix is lucky to have you. We told him so last week. Also that if he ever makes you unhappy, we shall make him regret it." "You did not." "We did," Ophelia confirmed cheerfully. "He looked startled, then amused, then promised he had no intention of making you unhappy. I believe him." So did Penelope. The ceremony was brief, the vows spoken clearly despite her trembling voice. When Felix placed the ring on her finger, his hand was steady, his gray eyes warm with promises they would spend years fulfilling. "I present Lord and Lady Thornbridge," the vicar announced. Penelope looked up at her husband, and saw her own wonder reflected in his face. Against all odds, against all society's expectations, they had found each other. The wedding breakfast was equally modest, though Lady Thornbridge had managed to invite half of London despite Felix's objections. Penelope endured the congratulations with grace, noting the whispers that followed her everywhere. The unmarriageable spinster who had somehow captured a marquis. The plain woman who must have employed some trick, some manipulation, some inexplicable appeal that defied logic. Penelope even observed her mother, Lady Grantwell, accepting congratulations from guests with an air of bewildered pride, as though she had somehow orchestrated this improbable and prestigious match all along. Let them whisper. They would never understand that Felix valued her mind, that intelligence could be more attractive than beauty, that genuine connection mattered more than social standing. During the toasts, Felix's brother Hartwell rose with obvious reluctance. His speech was brief and notably lacking in warmth, mentioning duty and family obligation without once congratulating the couple on their happiness. Felix remained unmoved throughout, his hand firm on Penelope's beneath the table. When Lady Thornbridge rose for her toast, however, her words carried genuine affection. "To my nephew Felix and his bride Penelope, may they find in marriage the same intellectual partnership and genuine affection they have discovered during their courtship. And may they forgive an old woman for initially doubting that unconventional love could be the strongest of all." The gathering applauded. Felix leaned close to Penelope's ear. "Are you ready to depart? I have tolerated society long enough for one day." "More than ready," Penelope whispered back. They departed amid a shower of rose petals, climbing into the carriage that would take them to Thornbridge Estate. As London faded behind them, Penelope felt the weight of 7 seasons finally lift from her shoulders. She was married, she was valued, she was loved. Not despite her intelligence, but because of it. 6 months later, Penelope stood in the conservatory of Thornbridge Estate, reviewing the illustrations for her botanical text. Felix had insisted she publish her work, had connected her with his scientific contacts, had championed her research to anyone who would listen. The book was nearly complete, a comprehensive guide to orchid cultivation in English climates, illustrated with her own drawings. The dedication read, "To Felix, who saw beauty in what others overlooked." "They are magnificent," Felix said from the doorway, crossing to examine her latest illustrations. "Your publishers will be thrilled. You may single-handedly revolutionize English orchid cultivation." "You are biased. I am honest. Your work is exceptional." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I received a letter from Lord Hartwell today. He wishes to apologize for his behavior at our wedding." What prompted this change of heart? Apparently, his wife informed him he was being an insufferable prig. "She read several passages from your botanical texts and declared me the wisest man in England for recognizing your value." Felix sounded amused. "My sister-in-law has better judgment than I credited." Penelope turned in his embrace, studying his face. Marriage had softened some of his severity, though he remained as direct and occasionally tactless as ever. But now she knew the warmth beneath his austere exterior, the kindness he showed in practical ways rather than flowery speeches. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Marrying the unmarriageable spinster instead of a suitable debutante?" Felix's expression turned serious. "Never. Not once. You are my intellectual equal, my dearest companion, my partner in creating something meaningful rather than merely producing heirs and attending tedious social events." He kissed her forehead gently. "Society called us misanthrope and spinster. I prefer to think of us as two people who refused to accept less than we deserved." "And what did we deserve?" "Each other." Felix smiled, that rare expression that transformed his austere features. "Now come. The new orchid specimens arrived from India this morning. I need your opinion on their classification." Penelope laughed, allowing him to pull her toward the greenhouse. This was her life now, days filled with scientific discourse, intellectual partnership, and the quiet joy of being valued for precisely who she was. 7 seasons of being overlooked had taught her patience. But they had also taught her this: the right person would see her clearly, would value her intelligence, would love her not, despite her unconventional nature, but because of it. Felix had been worth the wait. They had both been worth the wait. Dear listener, perhaps you too have stood in ballrooms feeling invisible, watching as others are chosen while you remain unseen. Perhaps you have hidden your intelligence, muted your passions, tried to fit yourself into shapes that society finds acceptable. Perhaps you have been told, subtly or explicitly, that who you truly are is somehow not enough. Penelope's story reminds us that being overlooked by the wrong people is not failure, it is protection. Every person who could not see her value was simply clearing space for someone who would. Her 7 seasons of waiting were not wasted years, but years that taught her to value herself, to develop her passions, to become someone substantial enough to recognize genuine love when it finally arrived. Your intelligence is not a liability. Your unconventional interests are not shameful. Your refusal to diminish yourself is not the problem. You are not too much or too little. You are precisely as you should be, waiting for people wise enough to recognize your worth. Tonight, know that you are seen. The right people will find your mind fascinating, your passions compelling, your authentic self irresistible. The wait, though painful, is protecting you from connections that would require you to be smaller, quieter, less yourself. Rest in the knowledge that you are valuable exactly as you are. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of Penelope and Felix's journey. If this story of overlooked brilliance and unexpected love touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that intelligence and authenticity are beautiful. Your support helps us continue creating stories that celebrate unconventional love and the triumph of being truly seen.